Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.
Hello, welcome to the RTÉ GAA Podcast. We're a bit late, a day late, so we've made up for it by having most of a defensive line here. We got 5 of us. Mikey, Stafford here. I am Stephen Cluxton to Jackie Hurley's Evan Comerford. She just thought she's just out for one podcast. No, she is just out for one podcast. But I just sauntered into the Parnell Park dressing room, put down my gear bag like the last 2 years never happened. Joined by Rory O'Neill as always, Michael Foley of the Sunday Times, Ciaran Whelan from Dublin, and Tomás Ó Sé from Kerry. We managed to drag them all together now. It's a safe time after the All-Irelands happened. And this podcast might be a little bit late, but I'm telling you, all those other podcasts are going to be smoked. This is going to be fantastic. We'll get on to Paul Flynn's late night tweeting later on and talk about Footballer of the Year and Team of the Year, which is always good crack. But Whelo, I'll start with you, I suppose. 48 hours on or close enough. How does it feel? Is this the sweetest of all the All-Irelands that have been won since you retired?
Yeah, well, I think 2011 was massive significance. After the lads had dominated us for a long time, that one was massive in the county. But definitely being out and about the last couple of nights, and you get a sense that this one is up there with them, and it's that kind of atmosphere that's kind of around Dublin and the city that was there in 2011. So yeah, absolutely. I think this was what's definitely come out, Mikey, the last couple of days. Is between the interviews with the players, there was that real unity of focus within the group, that they were on a mission, and they were. We spoke about them, everyone coming back for to get one more, but they obviously, Dessie deserves, I suppose, credit having taken criticism and all the rumours that bounced around the last couple of years, and Stephen Cluxton and the COVID issues and Mannion and McCaffrey, and when you actually weigh it up and you look at the last 10 minutes of the game and you look at the contributions of Cluxton, Mannion and McCaffrey, you got to say they were the key probably difference in getting Dublin over the line this year, and they weren't there last year. So it was a game of fine margins. Even looking back on it, watching it a second time, the intensity within it, the physicality within it. I think there was very little structure and tactics to it. Obviously, it was an absorbing game of kind of mistakes, if you want to call it that. A lot of turnovers. Both teams were trying to feed off the turnovers. And it became a lot about counter-attack football then. And I think, Dublin just may have had that little bit more composure in the closing minutes, but it was a very, very fine margins. And even as much as when you talk about Mick Fitzsimons, and I know we'll talk about Mick Fitzsimons, but the very fact that Mick Fitzsimons went and disputed with the umpire, and probably the reputation that he had over the last 10 years as being a fairly tough but fair, clean footballer, that's kind of a small bit of leadership that can nearly win All Irelands. If he says nothing and he just disputes with Goff, and Goff continues to give that free in, it's going to be a different game. And that to me was one thing that stood out. And when looking back at the match, that moment where he goes in and remonstrates with the umpire, and the umpire obviously backs him up, and Goff throws up the ball and doesn't get a score off that. They're the kind of small margins you're talking about. So it's been a good couple of days, all right, and great atmosphere around the place, and great, delighted for all the lads, particularly the James McCarthy's and Fitzsimons, and then Clux and what he added when he came back. So yeah, nice couple of days, good celebrations. It's Tuesday night now, beginning to quieten down a bit.
I'm afraid the flip side, the reverse question has to go to you, Tomás. You get the sense that as All Ireland final defeats go, this is a pretty scaldy one going. Obviously, who the opponent was, the fact that there's 3 players now gone on to 9 All-Irelands is significant in some circles. But I guess more than anything, it's the nature of that defeat, being outscored so much down the stretch. There was that free turned over. There was also obviously the Gavin White interception. There was Whelo Ó Sé like slipping when he could have made a quick hand pass to Clifford, and God knows what would have happened. There's a lot of what ifs, I guess, but at the end of the day, being outscored was 7 points to 2 down the stretch. That's a hard one to take.
Yeah, Mikey, and that was the difference. There was that goal that came, the Gavin White turnover. It was a match of turnovers. It was probably a poor match. It was a poor football game as such. Defences were on top. There was a lot of mistakes. There was a pile of turnovers on both sides. That turnover and that goal was massive, I think. Yes, Kerry did come back and got 3 points up. But it was the reply from Dublin. Whelo touched on it. I think that Mannion free was massive because Jack McCaffrey kicked it over. Could have been called back. He was fouled twice in that play. It was pulled back to the original foul, and it was a fair kick. But they showed unbelievable character all the day. And, you could speak about records, but the reality is that Dublin have blown every record out of the water in the last 10 years, every record. And people are talking about the 3 lads that won the 9. Look, it's just another one of it. They have 6 in a row. They have everything, and I think why it hurts is, I suppose, it wasn't that Dublin were completely written off, but I think the other factor that Kerry had gotten over the line against Dublin last year, had won in All-Ireland. This group of players possibly had a little bit more confidence in themselves, felt they had the answers to this Dublin team, and I've no doubt that it's the sweetest one. I remember we were written off in 2009, and it was my last time winning a medal, and it was the sweetest one. A lot of people would point to the first one, but Dublin were better. Dublin were just better on the day. They were cuter on the day. I think they had their leaders. I thought, looking back at it, I watched it again. I normally don't. I watched it again, and
geez, there's commitment to the cause.
I think
it probably was the kind of
Yeah,
it probably was the kind of game that you nearly needed a second view in, though, to really kind of get everything that was going on. Tomás.
Rory, you had leaders that stood up at different stages. Cluxon was amazing throughout. Cluxon was absolutely, we couldn't. Howard got 9 kickouts, and 7 of them, I think, were in the first half. And Kerry were trying to press, but they just didn't have an answer for him. And when he cramped, you had Fenton thunder into the game in the second half. And you had Mannion obviously flying it. It was just, they had the answers. They had somebody, Paddy Clifford, to be fair to him, did everything in his power over a 20-minute period to stand up, and he grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck. But they needed more, and they needed a bit of a wave at that time. A lot of people are coming heavy on the Kerry midfield. If you look at it again, I'd give Diarmuid O'Connor a lot of credit. I think they were on the back foot. It was as if Kerry or Dublin were dictating the game to them. They spent so much time defending, so much time tracking. They couldn't leave an imprint on the game going the other way. So it is. It's disappointing. But at the end of the day, I think what's most disappointing is we can't really complain. We can't even use the ref. We can't. There's nobody, absolutely nobody. I was back in West Kerry last night. I went out. A few buddies were having a few beers, drowning their sorrow. So I went out for them for a while, and nobody was giving out about it. There was nobody giving out about golf. There was nobody. We just weren't there, and it was just a disappointment and a kind of a feeling of one getaway possibly, but on the day we just weren't. We didn't perform. And there was always a day, even though looking back on it again, Clifford had great chances, and in fairness to him, only for him we wouldn't have been in an All-Ireland final. Let's be honest, he dragged that team on his back for most of the year. Some of the chances he had, he had opportunities, and people can say that Mick Fitz had a great game, which he did. I'd agree fully. He had a huge game, and I think he was breathing down his neck all day, but Kerry had opportunities. And look, on another day could have, but didn't.
Mick, I suppose now the get the gang back together for one last heist was the narrative beforehand, and Colm O'Rourke on a podcast previewing the final says James McCarthy told him after the Dublin Meath league match that he was going to retire at the end of this year. there's a sense that maybe the job is done. They've got to 9. They've got a second one for Dessie. But on the other hand, I was struck by Marty Morrissey interviewing Brian Howard. Brian, it was your birthday, wasn't it? Yeah, I was 26 on Sunday. How many All Irelands have you got now, Brian? 5. So there is another generation of leaders coming through there, and I don't think the wheels fall off for Dublin altogether, even if a couple of veterans decide to retire permanently this time.
Probably depends what you define as the wheels falling off. Like, if you're expecting Dublin to win 3 in a row or whatever, or go on a run like it did in the previous decades, you're probably wrong there. So maybe the wheels fall off if that's what you're expecting. But like the question, look, as you say, I mean, the narrative all summer was like they've got them back together. It's one last squeeze, do it for the Gipper, do it for Dessie, let's just do it for James. Let's get James up the steps. It's actually, and that's great. That's powerful stuff. My wondering is that, like, when the dust settles now and the time passes, obviously there'll be a couple will step away, but there may be a couple of others that you might expect to step away that might think, well, if I do step away, that'll be 3 or 4 of us, and what Dublin won't want to happen is for the whole thing to fall off a cliff, or they want to avoid that at the very least. So, and also when you win an All-Ireland, I'd imagine that the energy you get off that, well, if you have a 50-50 call to make, it might nudge you the other direction to stay on and just see how it goes. I don't know. But, like, yeah, and I mean, I suppose the encouraging thing for them this year was that you had the likes, I mean, Tomás mentioned leaders there. Like, you had, Conor Costello didn't have a great game the last day, but he had good games when Dublin needed him to in the earlier rounds. Colin Basquel was a fella that was coming back in the second half, and you were looking, you got 5 minutes, buddy. And like in that 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the first 5-10 minutes second half, he was immense, and he ended up having a fine second half. So like guys did step up, fellas that you wanted to see. Lee Gannon had a decent game. But another step forward, they missed Sean Bugler. I'd say that was a big loss to them as well. So they've got guys there. Whether they can, like, I think it's an interesting thing because, like, if Kerry had won on Sunday, you're looking at, we'd be talking about, the prospects for 3 in a row, right? But we're now looking at Kerry having won 1. Dublin judgment, I would say, will be reserved on their future until we see who's there next January. And then you're looking at a big pack now behind them. So that was an enormous All-Ireland. It was an enormous All-Ireland for Dublin to win for all sorts of reasons. It was a huge one for Kerry to win for reasons that they probably wouldn't have even explored themselves. But it was a massive one. And it's a big one for the championship itself because, kind of all bets are up. I mean, Dublin are ahead of the pack, but they're not a million miles ahead. And again, as I said, depending on who's going to be there next year, and Kerry will be right there again, obviously. And you've got other guys as well. So, to me, it was a real, I wouldn't say sliding doors, probably the wrong expression, but it was a kind of a hinge All-Ireland. It could have swung either way. If Kerry had won it, you're looking at, potentially talking about that Kerry team in a different way. But now you're talking about that Dublin group in a different way. And you're looking at the All-Ireland semi-final last year in a different way. And you're looking at all sorts of things in a different way. So it was, as an outcome, as a game, it was awful. But as an outcome, it was very interesting.
Yeah, Rory, it wasn't one for the ages. And it was built up, obviously, because it's Kerry in Dublin. It's like, a generational Kerry team going for one last kick against a Kerry team that's threaded with kind of, talents that we haven't seen before, etc. And there was tension in it up until the last 5 minutes or so, but it wasn't of high quality, really, was it?
No, no. I put a tweet out, which might have been a bit hasty initially because I hadn't actually watched it back. I was in there at the match, which I found, I'll be honest, by the way, from a GA perspective, a very underwhelming experience overall. It didn't even feel like an All-Ireland final until the parade started. And they have a job of work to do there, but look, that's for another day. The first half, I mean, I turned around to a Dublin friend of mine who was sat next to me and I said, I've seen some bad All-Ireland final first halves, and that's right up there with them. It was 6-4 at half. The Kerry had scored 2 points from play in 38 minutes of football in an All-Ireland final. It was extraordinary. But like, I think to go back to what Whelo mentioned, and I think it's fair, it was a lot of mistakes, a lot of tension. There was loads of sections where I thought it was bizarre. There was just silence, almost but not silence. There was just this intense sort of hush, and I'd never experienced anything like it at an All-Ireland final. Maybe I haven't been to that many football ones, but I suppose the only thing that you could compare it to, and are we comparing apples and oranges? is in a hurling context, and it's totally different. One thing I do think is worth noting is Dave Goff's performance. I felt he was outstanding. I thought he allowed loads go, and I thought that added to it. Definitely watching it back, it was probably a better game than I initially gave it credit for, certainly the second half. And it was, in my view, I think he should let more go. I think referees need to let more go. I think that's a big problem. There's too many frees handed out in Gaelic football. It creates a stop-start mentality. I think, allowing the near-hand tackle, that's the first thing I'd look to redefine. Let fellas go in with two hands. They allow it in hurling. Why can't they allow it in football? And I thought Goff was excellent in terms of keeping the game flowing. I know the Dublin supporters were giving out because he wasn't giving them any frees, but I was watching him on a couple of occasions, and he had his hand up, I think, on about 3 occasions, playing advantage for Dublin. So, like, he kind of did his best to try and facilitate a really good physical contest. And when you watch it on TV, which I probably should have before I put out that tweet, I think you could only but admire the athleticism of the two teams. It was proper, real tough All-Ireland football final. From that point of view, it was enjoyable, but in terms of quality, it was definitely on the low end.
Yeah.
But Rory, just on the notion, right, of a Dublin Kerry All-Ireland final going to save football, right? It's one of the great myths that has existed for about 7 decades now. The one thing that Kerry and Dublin are going to guarantee is a bad final, right? The only time that I can think of...
2011 was a good game, wasn't it?
I don't know. Like 2019. The 2019 games are the exception that proved the rule. 2019 game, the drawing game was a great game, I thought. 2015 is terrible. 2011 was... I didn't think it was hectic.
A good game.
Which one? That was a semi, Tomás. That was the best game.
Kerry Dublin,
They do brilliant semi-finals. So, this is just my opinion. 2019 was very good, fair enough. 15, awful. 11, nah. The ones in the mid-80s, 84, 85 were dreadful games. 79 was a washout. 78's a washout. 76 and 75, I mean, looking at the score lines, it looks like they weren't great games. But, I haven't gone back to watch them. But, they don't do, it's something that they need. You great semi-finals, not great finals. I wonder, is it a fear of losing when they get there against each other? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Because last Sunday, again, you had 2 teams that's kind of sat back. And as you say, it was a tribute, like, to kind of an element of warrior that's in Gaelic football. I mean, the hits were unbelievable. Some of the tackling was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. But, like, there were moments where you grab the game, knock a ball over the bar and transform the thing, but there was no transformative moment, attacking moments like that. Fellas, it's just a lot of mistakes, and look at the conditions didn't help, greasy ball and all the rest of it. But no, I mean, it was indicative of the entire championship. Anybody really who went in expecting a really good game, I don't think they were watching much football this year, and they definitely weren't paying attention to anything that Dublin Kerry have done in the last 70 years in All-Ireland finals. It kind of worked out for me. It worked out exactly how I thought it would.
Yeah, we did get Whelo. We did get one thing we expected to get was kind of an intensity in the tackling from both teams. Like Kerry's quarterfinal performance was a real eye opener, and Dublin have, I think, been re-energized a bit this year in that respect, and by one man in particular. I think most people seem to think their captain and leader, James McCarthy, and those re-refereeing the matches on social media afterwards are of the opinion that James McCarthy should have been sent off about 3 times, which I think is a little bit unfair. But he there was a physicality to it, at least, which would it did kind of tweak the senses, shall we say, even if the football wasn't great. It was hard hitting stuff, which from the two purists of Gaelic football.
Yeah, I think I think the players will play to the line as well, and they'll measure the approach to the referee. And David Goff, I don't think blow the whistle for the first 10 minutes, so players will weigh up to that. And I'd hazard to say, like, if was he counting personal fouls, you know what I mean? Because there could have been a few lads sent off, you know what I mean? If he was, if that was the case. So I think, listen, I agree with Rory. You don't want to stop-start game. You want to All-Ireland final. It's good, hard, physical, hard hitting. And James had one high tackle, he got a yellow card from. I don't think there was anything after that. There was of any significance. But I think, going back to Mikey's point there about them sitting back, and I think that played into Dublin's hands to a certain degree. And Tomás, you touched on it as well. I know Dermot O'Connor had some good moments in terms of his work rate and his ethic, but I felt coming into this game that Kerry had an issue in midfield and they didn't want contested kickouts, and that was something that was prevalent in their last few games. And I think that allowed Dublin to be able to drop back through the lines and close down the space, get their rotating sweeper in play, and cut off the Kerry kicking game. Like Dessie Farrell said it afterwards, the first half played out like Dublin had hoped it would play out. So I think that, that aspect of the game to me was critical, because any kick out that went long in the first half, Dublin won it. And Kerry got a bit spooked by that. And while Jack Barry plucked a great one in the second half, I think there was also a little bit of an underlying fear there from Kerry to press up on the Dublin kick out following what happened in the Mayo game and such. And I just think Kerry became a little bit unsure of themselves in the middle third, and the way both teams set up nearly suited Dublin, because I actually think Dublin have a stronger counter-attacking game. It's been a facet in their game plan all year. The turnover, they break at significant pace in 4s and 5s and get up the pitch and eventually get a shot off or get a score. So to me, the midfield battle I thought was important, because you're going into the game as you're thinking that the narrative is Jack Barry has to keep Brian Fenton quiet. But that when you put that in context, you're saying, so that's the best Kerry are hoping for. They don't have somebody who can actually grab the game with the scruff of the neck and win it. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's where Dublin had that advantage. I thought Fenton was immense to me. People, we talk player of the year and that sort of stuff, but from Dublin's player of the year, I think Fenton nearly outdone McCarthy in the last few games in terms of in the crucial moments, and he kind of got Dublin over the line. So I think tactically the way the game was played might have suited Dublin a little bit better, and it stopped Kerry from playing the game with the strengths that they have.
Yeah, that Kerry, Dublin will do that in Tomás, won't they? Like, you've got Cluxton delivering the ball, you've got Howard's movement, and like the fact you mentioned, I think he picked up 9 kickouts and some of them were at the touchline, like he was everywhere. And then when the ball was played long, you have Fenton, who, if he's not going to take it himself, he's going to spoil it. As you said, the Kerry midfielders didn't do a whole lot wrong, but they did at the same time lose the battle, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, modern game is about possession, and I think Ciaran made a really good point there, in that Dublin are brilliant at counter-attacking. I think Kerry were possibly too slow bringing that ball out of defence anytime they turned it over. Now, you can give credit to Dublin there for their tackling and I've said it a number of times this year. I think, Dublin are at times, I know there's at times in games where everybody's back in defence, but at times they're pressed up, and I don't think no team in the country does it as good as them one-on-one. They have one-on-one everywhere, and everybody gets tracked, everybody gets tagged, everybody gets followed. Every run is marked, and they're excellent at it. And I think Kerry struggled. You look at it from an attacking point of view. Tom Sullivan, teams are doing their homework on Kerry. Tom Sullivan was tagged by Derry. He was tagged by Dublin in terms of attacking play. Gavin White was excellent against Derry in the semi-final, and he was probably tagged. I think that turnover probably rattled him. I didn't see him get involved that much after it. He had an outstanding year for Kerry, but I think the difference, like you could be talking about it all day. It was mentioned at the start, 7-2 in the last 20 minutes of the game. That was it, and just Dublin's ability. Like, I made a quick call after the game to my brother, and he was calling Cluxton man of the match. He just says he did it again. He just pulled.
They make it too easy for him, though, Tomás. I mean, like, I was
something they struggled with, Rory.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, that's fair. But like, when watching it, right, I was very disappointed in Kerry in that I felt they needed to change the terms of engagement. Like, I felt they played the game on Dublin's terms from the very start, and I think Dublin are better at that game. I mean, they just needed to switch that momentum. Maybe needed to be a bit braver. Instead, I kind of got a sense that they were very wedded to this, what I would consider maybe an alien and slightly Ulster mindset and philosophy of trying to work this turnover scoreboard thing. And I thought Dublin read it like an open book. I think Dublin were happy enough to play that type of game. And I think maybe Kerry needed to come with something a little bit different. That meant maybe slightly more traditional in their approach and pull Dublin into a sort of an old school contest. You know, trust their instincts as Gaelic footballers a little bit better, that natural feel, ignore the robotics of, you know, we all have to get back into shape and all of this. You know, like, I just thought that there was a plan A, and we're sticking to it no matter what, because we're in this trust the process bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I like, you have to kind of, it's 70 minutes pulling up and they were still draw game. And I know we're talking, like, there was an amount, I think the Kerry defence, even though a lot of the scores, and I'll come back to it in a second, were loose enough towards the end. I do think that the Kerry defence did well and turned over an awful lot of ball. I think they were in the game when you consider that probably Clifford, who was the difference in all those games, had those scores gone over, we'd be having a completely different chat right now, and we'd be talking about how Kerry had so many turnovers. Like, margin of errors in All-Ireland finals are huge. The differences were Pascal popping 2 in the second half, Fenton popping 2 in the second half. Like, you talk about the press, and I think it's something that rattled them since I was at the game, in the Tipperary game in Killarney, and my God, were they aggressive everywhere, aggressive on the press. And I mean, it's 114, it's still in my head, 114 was what Kerry have scored from kickouts, opposition kickouts, but 1-9 of that came in the Munster Championship alone. And when they hit that Mayo game, it absolutely rattled them. And like, there was Fenton's score, if you look back, lads, if you just follow back to Fenton's score in the second half, everybody was pressed up, Kerry were pressed up, and then can't remember which Dublin player came down the middle in between the half back and the centre back and just took a possession, and you're saying, where you can't even see his man on the screen, and you're saying he must be covering, he must be just sitting in the middle, holding the middle. And about 3 seconds later, Fenton gets on the ball in the middle where you think that player is, and takes about 5 solos, plays a 1-2 and over the bar. And, you know, I think Jack referred to it, that it took so much energy after that goal to get 3 ahead again, that, you know, did they have the collective energy to defend? Pascal got a score off Paul Murphy towards the end, and, you know, it was just too easy. Those 2 scores in particular stick in my head as being like, Kerry were scrambling. You look at the pressure Clifford was under every time he was shooting. You look at they didn't have space. You know, that's what made Paddy Clifford's 2 scores so excellent. But down the other side, towards the end of the game, possibly a couple of easy scores went over.
Yeah. Mick, are we talking here then? We're talking about down the stretch, you know, the Kerry tiring. Is the issue for Kerry now in the very long off season, is it to find more squad players? Is it to strengthen depth and like find a few more impact players? Because that's how Dublin have won, you know, the vast majority of their All-Ireland finals, is they've been able to bring they've been able to bring game changers off the bench, which not every county can do.
Yeah, and look, it kind of happened again. Maybe not game changers. I mean, Jack McCaffrey was terrific when he came on, but they weren't throwing in game changers in the way they would have before. I mean, it's
not the same as 5-6 years ago,
no, but like Sean McMahon and Cian Murphy came in and they showed for kickouts, and particularly Cian Murphy did really, really well.
Cian Murphy did really well. You know, he only got 11 minutes. He thought he played well. He wouldn't have, because he wouldn't have had a huge amount of game time all year, Mick.
No, good player, and like he did that, the kind of nuts and bolts stuff they needed him to do. But I mean, I think the issue for Kerry was that you had a lot of players in it, like compared to last year's squad. It hadn't really changed, like the 15 or their preferred starting 15 hadn't really moved on, and the guys that they'd like say the 20 lads that they'd like to have on a field in the 70 odd minutes hadn't really changed an awful lot. Within that, I thought a few of them had come on a good bit, like as individuals, but just as a squad, I wasn't. You didn't get to see, you didn't see many really new guys coming in and just pushing the agenda for themselves a bit more. It was kind of still going back to the same, and you see that sometimes with champions that come back, and particularly with Kerry's age profile. I mean, they're not an old team, you know. So I mean, you're kind of going, well, what will we be changing, you know? So yeah, you're right. I mean, basically, you're right, Mikey. I mean, they'll go back now and they'll have club championship, and there's plenty of players to have a look at. And there'll always be players in Kerry to have a look, and guys coming at different times in different times of their career, different ages, and so on and so forth. And again, go back to the kind of the general point there. Like, I mean, Tomás is right. Like, I mean, for want of a few scores that bounced off a post and went here and there, I mean, if Kerry had won by 2 points the last day, the Dubs would be saying much the same as what they're saying in Kerry now. Fair enough, it was that kind of a game. But in the heel of the hunt, I suppose, look, Dublin I'm not so sure it was that scientific in terms of what Kerry did wrong. It was just that Dublin just did that little bit more right, you know what I mean? And just they got the leaders when they needed them, they got little scores when they needed them. Again, if David Clifford had knocked over those couple that maybe he would have done on another day, I wouldn't be overly critical of him at all, because I mean, even on the day itself, he did a lot on the day that was good. But look, could be a different story. But yeah, look, they're going to come back. They're going to be the front runners. They're either going to be the front runners, or they're going to be the next crowd up to Dublin starting off next January anyway. It's all the one.
We won't fear for them. Before we get on to the Footballer of the Year chat, which I've been waiting for, Whelo, kind of the same question regarding Dublin, I suppose. What's your sense on kind of the lads who came back, or the veterans, the lads with 9 Celtic crosses in their pockets? Do you think any of them will stay on? And if they don't, what are you seeing? Like, there's this idea a few years ago, it was like, oh, Dublin have a conveyor belt. Now it's no, they were generational talents. Is what's your sense of kind of what's waiting in the wings? Because obviously there was young lads kind of dropped off the panel this year with older lads coming back. So it wasn't the sense that Dessie was building for the future, shall we say. So what does the future look like for Dublin?
It's very tricky, Mike, being honest, because I think the first real issue is whether Dessie stays, being honest. He got a sense that everyone was back for one push, but as the lad said, when they digest things and the energy they take off this, will they all be sitting down and saying, well, is there potentially another one in us?
10 is such a lovely round number.
Yeah, but I think it's more when you look at the context of the performances, and you look at Cluxton, and you look at Mick Fitzsimons, you look at James McCarthy, like, they all started, none of them were taken off. Do you know what I mean? They all finished the game. They look as in good shape as they've ever looked. So I think, Nick, you spoke about earlier on about, some going and some staying. I'd be a little bit concerned, Mikey, that, if one goes, 2 goes, 3 goes, 4 goes, that sort of way. And I think it's the next layer then behind them, the guys that are coming to the 30 mark that who have so much success as well, that you definitely want them back in the dressing room as well. So it's looking beyond kind of the 3 obvious ones we're talking about, and then obviously Dean Rock, who's been a brilliant service as well. But my gut is that it really comes down to Dessie's decision. And I think if Dessie goes, it can, yourself, when you get to that age, to start a new regime or someone coming in, it's kind of, that can be kind of challenging in its own right. Where if Dessie and his management team now, decide that they're going to stay on, I think there's a better chance maybe of Dublin carrying those players maybe into next year. So that would be where I'd see that the key swing point is really Dessie's decision.
Yeah.
And listen, you certainly know everybody within Dublin would be hoping that they go again. But if they don't, you know what? They owe nobody anything. They've been warriors, absolute legends within Dublin football, and they deserve the break if they decide to hang up the boots. But no, I think it comes down to Dessie's decision. I think that's going to force the conversation to the others.
Dessie will probably give, if he is going to make a decision, Rory, he might give his successor more time than he was given himself by his predecessor, and he might make a decision in a timely fashion. What's your sense, and what's the sense of those on the ground in Dublin GA, Rory?
Oh, well, geez, I don't know. You wouldn't know. Like, I mean, you couldn't read it. I think Whelo's point is well.
The CEO going as well, obviously, is change enough in itself.
Yeah, no, yeah. The carcass, the most carcass name for the new guy coming in, Finn Barrow-Mahoney. But that'll be a big blow for Dublin GA. You know, look, John Costello again, unbelievable service over all those years. He sorted us out with loads of tickets in advance to the final. I need to give a shout out, say thanks to John for that. You know, we got fixed up with plenty, so he saved the day for us, and we do appreciate it. But
are you speaking on behalf of RTÉ there, Rory? Or,
no. I'm speaking on behalf. I'm speaking.
Double check there.
I'm speaking.
Did he send a helicopter up to you there to drop you in or anything like that?
I'm speaking
did you
on
bring your
behalf.
wife with you?
Yeah, no, I'm speaking on behalf of a Dublin GA club.
Mikey Costello even gives the Kerry lads tickets. Look, he's smiling on there. He's probably
one for everyone in the
holidays
audience.
in Killarney, lads.
But no, like I think it will probably come down to the management. I mean, Pat Gilroy is in there as well. Does he step into the shoes, creates a sense of continuity? Will they look for a clean sweep? I think Michael makes the point there about, you know, limiting the damage that a mass exodus can do. I think that's important. We saw it no better ourselves in Cork very acutely in the winter of 2013. When I think about 8 lads went at the one time and the team fell apart, and it took it's taken years to recover. So you've got to be careful. I think that's where Kerry have always been very good, actually, in just managing the 1s and 2s out and the 1s and 2s in. So that will be key, and it definitely comes back to a management situation. I think from Dessie's perspective, I think he deserves an awful lot of credit. Like, he has won his second All-Ireland. The first one obviously was COVID. That was really difficult. If you think back, he got a suspension for that training session, and I don't think he was overly happy about that as well. Definitely caused a little bit of a rancor within his camp. So look, I think all in all, you could not but be happy particularly for James McCarthy, who's a big favourite of mine, as we know, Mikey, and yeah, I think, look, there's a long winter there for people to stew on this, as we certainly know, given the season is over, which is another crazy thing. But anyway, the one thing I will say though, and I know Tomás says that there is a sense of disappointment in Kerry. I think this will sting. This is going to sting. The initial aftermath might be a sense of, you know, look, we've got to process it first, to use that awful word. I think in the days and weeks that will come, this one will hurt, and it will hurt badly, you know.
I suppose any All-Ireland final defeat will probably hurt. I'm told, haven't ever kind of felt one in my lifetime.
This will be stewed on, all right. This will be stewed on. I may have to head down in the autumn and report back. I'll be holding, some kind of like truth sessions and support.
Well, wearing a Barry's Tea era Cork jersey as well. Yeah,
O2, but yeah.
Okay, a few hours ago, Paul Flynn tweeted, bit of controversy my last tweet. Do I think Mick Fitz got the better of Clifford? Yes. Do I think Clifford was player of the year? No. Do I think he's one of the best in our generation? Yes. And top ambassador for the game. No more midnight tweets. Katie McCabe emoji, as we're going to call it for now on these zipped lips. So, yes, his tweet last night at, I think it was about 12:30. Clifford was smoked against Dublin and poor against Tyrone, yet still people think he's footballer of the year. Not for me. James Mack led Dublin to glory without having his best day yesterday. He's a born winner and leader. Whelo, how did you get hold of Paul Flynn's phone in the pub, and how long did it take him to realise you tweeted that?
Oh, listen, what did they say? When you drink, leave the phone away. I think there's a lesson in there, but I think you have to. Like, you look at David Clifford, guys, and I was only reflecting on this the last couple of days. The pressure on that young kid is just off the charts, and the weight of expectation that he carried into that final, it doesn't even bear thinking about, to be honest. And he was fantastic all year. And his contribution in the final, like, you look, Paul Mannion was man of the match and he got 4 points. And the narrative coming into the game was, if Dublin keep Clifford to 4 or 5, we'd be doing well. You know what I mean? He got 2, he was involved in assists and that sort of stuff. Mick Fitzsimons made it difficult for him, no doubt about it, and couldn't have probably done any better and put him under pressure and maybe forced him into a few quicker shots than he would have liked and stuff like that. But as we said, 1 or 2 of them in another day could have gone over. And as I said on Sunday, it was a duel for the ages. But I think in terms of, yes, within Dublin, there's the nostalgia of James McCarthy, and everybody kind of wants, get James up the steps and finish as player of the year or whatever. But I'd say if you probably asked James McCarthy, was he player of the year, he'd probably tell you in James fashion, he'd probably say, no, I wasn't. You know what I mean? So I would think, listen, Clifford was extremely consistent all year and still made a contribution in all the games. And that would be my view. And I think Dublin are in a great place to have the 9. And James McCarthy was excellent, as was Fenton, as was Cluxton. And there's probably 2 or 3 Dublin players that are in very closely in a slipstream. But
you mentioned Fenton earlier. You said kind of, but only in the final couple of games rather than the whole season. Is that your point?
Well, no, I think it really comes down to the last couple of games.
Tends to be when the decision is made off the back.
Yeah,
of
well, I thought Fenton against Mayo, and I thought against Monaghan 2 points. The one when they were under the cosh, and I thought yesterday in the first half and the second half, I thought he was brilliant. As really came into his own, similar to James McCarthy, and then Cluxton's performance yesterday. So they for me were probably the top 3 players and the 3 leaders and the 3 drivers, but Clifford was consistently very good all year. And even the day, I saw him down in Killarney against Mayo, the game they lost, like he single-handedly was dragging Kerry, trying to keep Kerry in that game, going into the second half. So listen, I don't think there can be many arguments from Dublin perspective. Dublin will be happy to get Sam, and David Clifford probably deserves his Player of the Year award.
Tomás, he's kind of damned by his own quality. Obviously, that people have these expectations of what he should do on any given day now, and that 2 points in an All-Ireland final is not acceptable, and he kicked a few wides. But over the course of the whole season, and if kind of nostalgia and emotion is going to come into it, the guy played in a Munster final the day after his mother passed away. So if James McCarthy gets if there's an emotion in James McCarthy getting the nod for being Dublin captain and winning a 9th All-Ireland, what David and Paddy Clifford did, earlier in the summer it's incredible in itself, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mentioned that last night, I thought, and I think the whole county appreciated. It was very hard for them, and even now, you can be guaranteed today, there's a constant battle, anybody, and we all go through it. It's not sports people, or it's not whatever, people lose and people die, and you have to go through that struggle, and football is very often a kind of an outlet for them, and I'd say that's what it was. It was remarkable. In 2002, same thing happened to us. Dara was captain, and it was I remember when that game finished, it was what do we do now, kind of a thing. So I would imagine it was very, very difficult. And then they had a homecoming last night, and he was up on the stage and he was talking and all that. But what I admire about them, Mikey, is there'll be none of that stuff. They won't be talking about that stuff. He gets on with it. It's the same way his temperament in matches. He gets picked on. He gets whatever. He puts up with it. He normally answers it on the scoreboard. I have spoken to a lot of Kerry people, and not one said that Clifford had a bad game. It was kind of he still contributed to that game. He created the goal. I'd have no issues at all with it. I was actually I think Paul Flynn shouldn't have answered that first tweet, leave it up. And if he thinks McCarthy, Pascal, Fenton, and not this order, and Cluxton are probably the 4 best players they've had this season. But for me, and I said it on the night, the way it is, the way the Player of the Year is voted, everybody gets a vote, and it was split down the middle. And
I don't know whether some of our votes filtered back.
They did. I'd say they did for that. I'd say they did.
For that one.
I'd be with you.
They didn't anyway. That's for sure.
I wouldn't. It was a late switch for the Player of the Year. Player of the Year in my head was Clifford, and I thought it was going into the studio. But there's look, all-star teams, lads. It's always the same. Players of the Year. It's always the same. I think Whelo touched on it. Nobody cares down in Kerry who gets Football of the Year, who gets the All-Stars. The one we wanted is above in Dublin, and at the end of the day, that's not going to change. So whatever arguments goes on about footballers of the year or not, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it does fill a nice gap in these few days after an All-Ireland. So we will continue to...
Mikey, just one point I'd like to make about Brian Fenton as well. The full-time whistle went, and he embraced whoever was closest to him. The camera went off him at that stage, but I was watching him, and he went around straight away before he went over and celebrated with the rest of his teammates, and he shook the hand of every single Kerry player. Literally just walked around to each and every single one of them, and I just thought it was a fantastic mark of him.
Yeah, no, they're well bred, those Raheny midfielders. Nice men, nice men. Mick, Brian Hurley or Sean Powder, who's your footballer of the year? Or where do you go with it?
Brian Powter. Or Sean Hurley, whichever one. No, like, I mean, do you know what? Do you know what the worst of these player of the year debates is? You suddenly start criticising fellas that have had really good
Yeah, you pick holes in these amazing
You kind of
seasons.
have to kind of put a kind of a rider at the whole start of the whole thing, kind of going, can we? They all had great seasons, and then you kind of get into the nuts and bolts. I personally would have gone for Clifford as well. It hasn't. Sorry, it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed. My last one, it didn't change anything. But it was a kind of a funny year. It was a funny year for football. It's a funny year to be picking all-star teams and players of the year and stuff, because some guys like that had good seasons or good periods, and all the rest. The one that was the most consistent for me, notwithstanding obviously, and we were only talking about a couple of kicks. Was David Clifford was probably the. And again, like when you're talking about players of the year, you've touched on it already. You are talking about character and personality as well a little bit, especially when it comes to a close call. I would have thought character and personality and what they, not necessarily what they were dealing with is the wrong word, but what they were facing through the year. And I mean, Tomás might have a different view on this from his own team back in the 90s in particular, but I can't recall a Kerry player since Maurice Fitz that has really had to, has been expected to throw a Kerry team up on top of his back. And that's not being insulting to the players that are there now. It's more about
Mick, did you hear when they were naming the teams before the game and they called out his name? Did you hear the roar that went up?
Yeah.
I mean,
like that's
you're kind of saying like, geez, heaping more pressure on him. Anyway.
Well, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think he's probably used. I mean, the sense I get, I mean, I won't pretend to know the man, but I've certainly spoken to an awful lot of people in the last 12 months, kind of who would know him and who
that wouldn't bother him that much.
Well, I think it's just the breeding and it's the life that he's already lived up the years and the expectation that's always been there. That it's not so much wouldn't bother him. It must have an effect on everybody. But I think he seems able to compartmentalize that kind of stuff and seems to be able to just to move through whatever things he has to do to get himself to the point where the whistle blows, and then he can start really being himself as a footballer, and everything else just kind of melts away. And it's the challenge of the game itself and, and the players and so on, and the players, the opponents and whatnot. So it strikes me, he's the kind of fella that stuff wouldn't have bothered him. He would have been obviously who wouldn't be aware of the enormous cheer he got. And I would hope and would imagine that last Sunday won't sort of set him back. If anything, it'll probably drive him on.
Yeah. Like if Kerry had won, the debate over football of the year would be a complete non-debate. I think is another way of looking at it. Just before we finish, Tomás, I would like to get your view on that. Just like because it is interesting, like from the county most renowned for having these kind of superstar forwards, kind of iconic players. What do you make of Mick's statement that like there's no one to touch him since Maurice Fitz in terms of kind of what's expected of him by his own people?
Well, I think Mick's point was that early on in Maurice's career, Maurice was carrying the team. You know, they were struggling at the time. And I think in the noughties, we had a lot of big players. You know, you had Gooch, but then you had Declan outside him, you had Donaghy, you had Dara, you had Moynihan. You know, there was an awful lot of quality in the team. Like they were able to drop 2 or 3 of us at one stage and it didn't dent anything, you know. So I think that's the point, Michael, if I'm right that you were saying, that there is now I know like you still have the argument in Kerry is possibly that, you know, at times he didn't have the support up front, and that's why on Sunday when Paul Gainey got 1-1 and Paddy was chipping in and you just needed that little extra bit maybe from Tom or Gavin or Diarmid or whatever to come as well. But that's the argument that he did ship it. Whelo's already mentioned it, that game down in Killarney, but you go back to Tyrone a couple of years ago and when they beat him in the semi-final and David ended up on the sideline, but before he went off, and that was another game they lost, he dragged them through that, like, and he's very, very rarely has a poor game for them. Any game he is quite in, it's fairly odd and fairly strange. The game is under control by Kerry. When he needs to perform, he performs, and I think that's after the game, I'd say the last day that hit him, you know, that it just didn't happen for him on the day. But no, I think overall he was phenomenal over the whole year. And there's an amount, Whelo said it right as well, there's an amount of pressure on him every day he togs. I'd say every day he goes out, every day he walks out the door, there's I've never seen a player like it, and we lived through the age with the gooch, but I'd say in the modern society with all social media, etc., he puts up with an awful amount, but takes it in his stride and is a good lad and has had a tough year and is lauded down in Kerry. They had a fantastic year, two of them.
Yeah. Well, look, I know I steered the conversation this way, but the fact of the matter is Dublin won the All-Ireland, and we have spent the last 7-8 minutes talking about him. There's something about him that kind of, people like watching him, people like talking about him, debating him, and it's great to have that in football. We'll leave it at that, lads. It's been a fun season. I wasn't here for most of it, obviously, but like Cluxton just came in, dropped down the gear bag, come on, win a medal.
Speaking of Cluxton, just on that, Mikey. Just speaking of Cluxton, was Cluxton on the bench in the year famous clash in Thurles in 2001, lads? Was he
Yes.
Was he a sub that day when Kerry played Dublin in the 2001 quarter-final below in Thurles?
He was, yeah. Cluxton was a sub that day. Cluxton would have played in the Leinster Championship that year. He made his debut in the Leinster Championship that year, and he was a sub that day. Yeah, he was on the bench. Like
that's extraordinary. Does anyone else find that extraordinary? I don't know.
What I find extraordinary, Rory, is that it's about 14 years since I played, right, which is a lifetime. There's been careers, loads of Dublin players had careers within that context. So it's 14 years since I played, and I played with them for 9 years. They have to scratch your head sometimes.
Mad, isn't it?
Jesus, when you put it like that.
Like, you said it there. Why would they? There's another couple of years in McCarthy. Cluxton the same. I know the timing and all that, but all of them, just Mannion, just like the standards Cluxton still sets are scary.
It is. It really is.
You're getting worried, Tomás, now. You're more worried than you were at the start of the call.
I'm not even going to think about next year. I'm still thinking about that Sunday.
Pat Gilroy will be texting you again, Tomás.
I swear to God, I got the text off and I was laughing. I said, fuck you and
all right. Thank you to Mick. Thank you to Whelo and to Tomás and to Rory. This podcast may be back in the next couple of weeks if there's things to chat about, but otherwise we'll be fallow until the intercounty season returns next year, as he says, on the 1st of August. But until we are back again, we'll chat to you then. So good luck and goodbye.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it! It's over!